the silence that echoes after the fans roar for years. They were treated like gods, modern heroes, idolized by millions, with million-dollar contracts, fans chanting their names, and a clear purpose: to win. But when the lights go out, when the last ball bounces on the floor, what's left? The truth is that not every NBA player can survive the silence. What you're about to see isn't about stats, titles, or great plays. It's about what happens to a man when he loses the thing that defined him. One of the most shocking cases was that of Delonte West, drafted in 2004. He shone alongside LeBron James in the Cavaliers, but his fame hid an internal war. Depression, bipolar disorder, and substance addiction turned his life into an open-air nightmare. Years after leaving the NBA, he was seen wandering the streets, barefoot, in miserable conditions. Where were his friends? Where was the league? The question few dare ask: does the NBA really take care of its players when the game is over? The case of Lorenzen Wright is even more disturbing, a former Memphis Grizzlies player. He was found dead in a forest in 2010. His body was decomposing. The investigation revealed that he had been murdered in cold blood, and the main suspect was his own ex-wife. He had lost money, friends, and peace of mind. From idol to crime statistic, these stories are not exceptions. They are signs of a system that consumes minds, bodies, and identities, and then abandons them. And the scariest thing, it's still happening. If you think the end of an NBA career means a peaceful retirement, wait until you see what comes next. The fall of a promise. The case of Tyrell Terry. Young Tyrell Terry, a brilliant prospect from Stanford, entered the NBA in 2020 with the world at his feet. A first-round pick, $1 million contract, refined technique, clear vision of the game. Everything seemed perfect for a new star in the league. He had what many only dream of. However, the pressure of living up to the expectations of a $1.3 million per year contract became an insurmountable emotional barrier. Shortly after his debut, Tyrell began to withdraw. Announcement after announcement, season after season. The justification was clinically clear: anxiety and deep depression. In 2023, Tyrell used TikTok to say, "Instead of building me, the system started to destroy me. I hated myself. I felt worthless." It was the first time that millions saw an NBA player exposed in such a raw, real way. This revelation resonated. About 30,000 people commented and shared similar stories. But no one talks about the factor that allowed this to happen so quickly. Look at this. A young man who was supposed to seek evolution within the NBA stood out and succumbed under his own potential. When he left the NBA, Tyrell revealed that he felt a kind of existential emptiness. He didn't want to play. The mourning for a career that would never be what he expected had set in. And it's not just Tyrell. The NBA, by creating heroes, also produces immeasurable psychological risks, especially for young people who were not prepared to deal with the downfall. The mental system provided by the league, constant performance accolades, contracts, seem sufficient on the surface, but it is vulnerable to destructive emotional ruptures. Tyrell entered specialized clinics, tried to seek help, but the contrasting silence of the sports world around him was glaring. Behind every contract, there is an untold story. A story about what happens to those who struggle daily to simply exist without a star, without applause, without a number, and without an identity. Today, young Terry lives far from the spotlight. He is no longer a star, but he is not free from pain either. Ben Gordon, the price of fame and the fall of a brilliant mind. Ben Gordon entered the NBA as one of the most promising players of his generation. With his explosive style, shooting ability, and undeniable tenacity, he quickly became a star for the Chicago Bulls and later the Detroit Pistons. However, the fame, the spotlight, and the celebrity status hit a silent battle, an internal war that would brutally unfold after he left the court in his early years. Everything seemed perfect. Success on the court, million-dollar contracts, and the respect of the fans. But the pressure to constantly perform, the overwhelming expectations, and the intense life of professional athletes began to take an invisible toll. Ben, like so many others, faced the challenge of maintaining an image of strength and invulnerability while his mind fought against internal storms. His career was marked by ups and downs, injuries and changes of teams, but the worst was yet to come. After his retirement, the layers of fame and glamour began to disintegrate. Ben Gordon has publicly revealed that he suffered from bipolar disorder, a serious mental illness that affects mood and behavior but is rarely understood by athletes. Revelation has brought new insight into the reality of many players who, like Ben, hide psychological pain beneath the shiny surface of the NBA. Ben's bipolar disorder has manifested itself in crisis episodes of deep depression and impulsiveness, which have culminated in situations of violence and legal trouble. His arrest in 2022 for assaulting his own son shocked fans and colleagues, and sparked an urgent debate about the support needed for former players. It is crucial to understand that Ben is not the villain in this story. He is the victim of a system that does not prepare its athletes for the battle after retirement. A system that celebrates physical achievements but neglects mental health, transition, and psychological support. social pressure to maintain the image of the invincible hero prevents players from seeking help. The mentality of being strong or not showing weakness stifles inner voices that call for help. Ben Gordon, with all his courage, broke this silence and showed the world the harsh reality that many prefer to ignore. Over the years, he tried various forms of treatment, but the stigma and the difficulty of accessing in-depth mental health care made his recovery difficult. This constant struggle between the shadow of the disease and the search for stability is a reflection of a broader crisis that plagues former high-performance athletes. In addition, Ben Gordon became a warning about the impact that unresolved trauma and mental illness can have not only on personal lives, but in the public sphere. His case highlights the urgency of psychological support programs within franchises and across sports leagues. Watching Ben's journey, it is impossible not to wonder how many other talents are going through this same anguish. Hidden behind the uniforms, how many bright futures are overshadowed by the lack of mental and emotional support. Ben Gordon symbolizes the human fragility that exists behind fame and statistics. His downfall reminds us that the mind is as important as the body, and that taking care of it should be a priority, especially when the world stops applauding. Ultimately, Ben Gordon's story is a sad and powerful tale of redemption and warning, a tale that should inspire change and greater empathy in the world of sports, so that athletes' minds are not destroyed by fame, but protected and valued. Keyon Dooling, the invisible trauma and the silent battle. Keyon Dooling entered the NBA with talent and determination, but his story goes far beyond the court. While many saw him only as an athlete, the truth he carried was much more painful and complex, a story marked by invisible traumas that shaped his life and his mind. Since childhood, Keyon faced a challenge that few dare to reveal. He was a victim of sexual abuse, a trauma that left a deep mark on him and would accompany him forever. This painful secret, kept for many years, was an open wound that influenced not only his personality, but also his career and his emotional well-being. During his years as a player, Keyon showed himself to be resilient and talented, playing games with determination and professionalism. But internally, he struggled with the devastating effects of the trauma that never had the chance to be properly treated. The childhood abuse triggered post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD), a condition that impacts daily life, causing intense anxiety, flashbacks, fear, and deep emotional difficulties. After retirement, when the hectic routine and focus on the court disappeared, the symptoms of PTSD intensified. Without adequate support, Keyon faced an invisible battle with his own thoughts, memories, and feelings, which led to an emotional and physical breakdown. The breaking point came in 2022, when Keyon was arrested for fraud in an NBA benefits scheme, more than a crime. This situation reflected the complexity of his mental health and the lack of support he received after leaving the sport. The fraud was not a malicious act, but a silent cry for help, a reflection of the desperation and confusion that overwhelmed him. Keyon Dooling's story exposes the systemic failure to recognize and treat emotional trauma in athletes, especially those who carry deep wounds from childhood. The pressure to succeed, the silence imposed by sports culture, and the lack of adequate care create an environment where these traumas turn into debilitating illnesses. In addition, Keyon's case brings to light the issue of the psychological impact of abuse and the importance of therapy and ongoing monitoring. Many athletes, out of fear of stigma or lack of resources, do not seek help, allowing these traumas to become crises that affect not only their lives, but also their families and communities. Keyon, by sharing his story publicly, has become the symbol of courage and vulnerability. His story reminds us that the past can be a long shadow, but that facing those shadows is the first step to healing. This journey, marked by pain, struggle, and resilience, is an invitation for the world of sports to become more humane and compassionate. May sports organizations create safe environments so that athletes can speak openly about their pain, seek help, and rebuild their lives. When we learn about Keyon Dooling's story, we are confronted with a harsh reality. Fame and talent are no protection against deep trauma. The mental battle is just as important as the physical one, and the lack of care can destroy lives. Keyon is not just a former player trapped in past mistakes. He is a human being dealing with the consequences of an invisible wound, struggling to find light in the midst of darkness. It is urgent that the NBA, other leagues, and society at large commit to supporting mental health, creating support networks, and raising awareness about trauma and its consequences. This is a story that goes beyond basketball. It is a narrative of pain, resilience, and the need for empathy. Jason Caffey at the price of financial irresponsibility and the spiral of a fragmented mind. Jason Caffey was a household name in the NBA in the late 1990s and early 2000s, with a solid career mainly with the Chicago Bulls. He was part of an important moment for the franchise, having won 2 titles alongside basketball legends. For many, Jason seemed to have a perfect life: money, fame, and achievements. However, behind this success, there was a devastating reality that few dare to tell. Jason's story is not just that of an elite athlete, but rather the cruel portrait of a mind that was consumed by pressure, excess, and a lack of preparation for life after the NBA lights went out. Jason earned millions, approximately $34 million, an amount that for most people would guarantee a peaceful life forever. However, for him, this money was not synonymous with security or happiness. Soon after retirement, the spiral began to take shape. Jason accumulated huge debts, mainly related to child support payments to 8 different women. These financial responsibilities, combined with a lack of proper financial management and a fragile mental state, led to his collapse. He declared bankruptcy and faced serious legal problems, including arrests related to non-payment. But the issue is not just about the money lost. Behind the financial crisis was a fragmented mind, incapable of dealing with the psychological pressure that success and failure imposed on him. Jason later revealed that he suffered from undiagnosed and untreated mental health issues, which directly influenced his erratic decisions and self-destructive behavior. The lack of emotional and psychological support for retired athletes is one of the great taboos in professional sports. Jason Caffey is a clear example of how the lack of this support can turn a promising life into a nightmare of debt, family problems, and social isolation. Often, the transition to post-career life is viewed with neglect by sports institutions, which focus only on physical performance and spectacle. Furthermore, the social and cultural pressure to maintain an image of success and control prevents former players like Jason from seeking help. Fear of judgment, exposure, and loss of status creates a toxic environment where mental health is overlooked. Jason found himself trapped in this trap, battling his own demons while trying to keep up appearances. His story also highlights the destructive impact of poorly managed family responsibilities. The multitude of pensions and financial obligations not only compromised his assets, but also affected his personal relationships, creating a vicious cycle of guilt, shame, and hopelessness. For years, Jason tried to rebuild himself, but the shadow of his past and the weight of mental and financial debt proved difficult to overcome. He withdrew from the media and the world of sports, living a period of isolation that reflected his internal struggle. His case serves as a warning to players, coaches, agents, and the NBA itself. Money may come and go, but taking care of your mental health and planning your life are essential to prevent stories like Jason's from happening again today. Jason Caffey represents the fragility that lies behind the glitter of fame. His story is not about failure, but about the urgency of recognizing that human beings are much more complex than the athlete who appears on the court. The price of financial irresponsibility often hides a cry for help, a plea for help that has never been heard. Jason teaches us that the greatest challenge is not in making millions, but in keeping your mind and life whole after the last whistle of the game. By understanding Jason Caffey's downfall, we are invited to reflect on how the sports system can and should do better investing in financial education, psychological support, and social reintegration programs for its athletes. This is a narrative that transcends basketball, showing that true victory lies in overcoming one's own limits and rebuilding oneself, even after destruction. John Wall, the pain behind the fame. The quiet battle against darkness. John Wall was considered one of the most promising and explosive point guards in the NBA over the past decade. His speed, playmaking ability, and intensity on the court captivated fans and critics alike, making him a regular on lists of the league's best young players. But while fans saw a dynamic and energetic athlete, John was battling a quiet storm within himself, a battle few knew about and that would only become public when his fame began to fade. From an early age, Wall displayed an impressive work ethic and passion for the game that led him to excel at every stage of his career. Success seemed inevitable, and the achievements came quickly. Multiple All-Star selections, leadership, and star status with the Washington Wizards franchise. But, as with many athletes, the line between glory and suffering is a fine one. Serious injuries began to undermine his career at crucial moments, sidelining him and causing physical suffering that soon translated into an immense psychological toll. The constant pain, the uncertainty about his future, and the frustration of not being able to help his team led him to an emotional abyss. John Wall, the vibrant and unbeatable athlete, began to show invisible cracks, the ones that only the mind can reveal. As retirement approached, whether temporary or permanent, emptiness set in, an emptiness as deep as the silence in the stands after the final whistle. John publicly revealed that he had struggled with suicidal thoughts and severe depression, a rare and powerful confession that shocked many, but also opened the door to an urgent dialogue about mental health in sports. John's struggle with depression was not a linear journey. He faced moments of hope, painful setbacks, and a constant battle to find balance. The pressure to maintain a strong public image, the expectations of fans, family, and sponsors, all weighed like a suffocating shadow. More than that, John Wall symbolizes the hidden face of sports success, the invisible pain, the lonely nights, the struggle against despair that often hides behind smiles and rehearsed interviews. His story serves to humanize idols, to remind us that fame does not protect anyone from mental suffering. In addition to depression, John dealt with the social isolation that comes with the end of a career full of routine and connections, the loss of athlete identity, The feeling of uselessness and fear for the future are ghosts that haunt many former players, and John was no exception. John Wall's story also reveals how the sports system still fails to prepare its athletes for the end of their careers. Support programs and psychological monitoring are scarce and often superficial. Players are thrown into the rough seas of post-basketball life, without a compass or anchor. Finally, John's courage in speaking openly about his mental health is a milestone, a light amid the darkness that surrounds many athletes. He shows that admitting vulnerability does not diminish strength, but transforms it into a call for action and understanding. His story is a powerful reminder that the greatest challenge for many players is not winning in sports, but winning themselves after the game is over. Gilbert Arenas. The weight of guilt and the fall of an icon. Gilbert Arenas was a brilliant NBA star, known for his explosive talent, charisma, and for carrying the weight of being the unlikely hero of the Washington Wizards. For years, he enchanted fans with incredible plays, decisive shots, and a personality that mixed confidence, irreverence, and fierce competitiveness. However, behind the smile and the brilliance on the court, there was a conflicted mind, a silent storm waiting to break loose. Fame, millions, and acclaim were not enough to fill the growing void that Gilbert felt. On the contrary, these elements often intensified his internal anguish. The peak of his turmoil came with a shocking episode, the famous incident with the weapons in the locker room, which not only put his career at risk, but also exposed to the world a dark side that few knew about. But what few understood at the time was that this episode was just the tip of the iceberg. Gilbert Arenas carried a huge burden of guilt for his actions, for the way he handled the pressure, and for the existential emptiness that dominated him. After retiring, this guilt turned into a deep, almost paralyzing sadness that plunged him into a state of despair and isolation. He revealed in interviews that despite having earned more than $100 million, he felt miserable. This contrast between material wealth and emotional poverty is a harsh portrait of the reality that many athletes face when they leave the spotlight. Gilbert spoke openly about the days when he felt purposeless, without motivation to move forward. The mind that shone on the court now struggled with dark thoughts, anguish that seemed to have no end. His story exposes a harsh truth. The end of a sports career can mean the beginning of an even more intense struggle, a battle against emptiness, and against the very ghosts that fame tried to hide. In addition, Gilbert Arenas' case shows how the lack of psychological and emotional support can accelerate an athlete's downfall. Without proper support, many are left to their own devices, facing pain alone that they should never have to bear. The impact of this is not only personal, it reverberates in their families, in their social circles, and, often, in society, which idealizes a perfect life and ignores the human complexity behind the stars. Gilbert Arenas, with all his candor, helped break taboos about mental health in sports, showing that vulnerability is not weakness, but rather the first step towards healing. His story is a silent cry for real change, for an NBA in a sports world that recognizes that athletes are complex human beings who need support before, during, and long after their last game. Powerful. Final CTA. End of video. What you saw here today is just the surface of a much larger and deeply human problem. These stories of minds destroyed by the NBA after fame show us that the brightness of the spotlight can hide the deepest darkness. If you were moved, if you felt the weight of these lives, know that you are not alone. It is urgent that we break the silence and talk openly about mental health, trauma, and vulnerability on and off the court. If you know someone who is struggling with these issues, offer your support. If you have ever felt this pain, know that seeking help is an act of courage. And if you are a basketball fan, remember, behind every star, there is a human story, full of challenges that deserve respect and empathy. Subscribe to the channel to follow stories that go beyond the game, that reveal the secrets and hidden truths of the NBA. Leave a like to help spread this message that can save lives. Share this video with friends, family, and the entire basketball community, because talking about mental health is talking about life. Together, we can transform what should not have happened into a call for change. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.